The first time Karen suggested I was getting too old for the garden, I actually smiled. She stood at my kitchen window, watching me pull weeds from the flower bed I'd tended for 30 years. "Eleanor, you really shouldn't be doing that anymore," she called through the glass. "It's too much work for someone your age." I brushed the dirt from my hands and waved at her. At 72, I still felt strong and capable. The garden was my joy, my peaceful place where I'd raised roses and memories together. But as the weeks passed, her comments became sharper, more frequent. "You're too frail for this," she'd say, not even trying to hide the annoyance in her voice. I began to notice the way she looked at me, like I was a problem that needed solving. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of her plan. Sunday afternoons had always been family time in my living room. The same living room where I'd rocked my son Marcus to sleep, where we'd opened Christmas presents, where we'd celebrated every milestone. But that particular Sunday, Karen dropped her first real bomb. She sat across from me in the chair that had been my husband's, fixing me with that cold smile I was starting to recognize. "Eleanor, don't you think this house is getting too big for you?" she asked, her voice sweet as honey, but her eyes hard as steel. "I mean, you're really getting too old to live here alone. Maybe it's time to think about moving somewhere more appropriate for someone in your condition." The words hit me like ice water. This wasn't concern. This was calculation. My heart began to race as I realized what she was really saying. Her next move would be far worse than I ever imagined. The change in Marcus broke my heart more than Karen's words ever could. My son, who used to call me every day just to check in, suddenly became distant. Our conversations grew shorter, colder. When I asked him to help me change a light bulb in the hallway, he sighed like I'd asked him to move mountains. "Mom, maybe you should consider getting someone to help you with these things," he said, avoiding my eyes. "You're asking a lot from us lately." But I wasn't asking for more than usual. I was asking for the same love and support I'd always given him. I watched him pull away, watched Karen's influence poison our relationship drop by drop. The son who once brought me flowers just because was now looking at me like I was a burden he couldn't wait to shed. I tried to ignore the growing distance between us, but the truth was becoming impossible to deny. I would soon find out the full extent of her manipulation. Winter evenings in my house had always been cozy, filled with the warmth of family and love. But that cold February night, warmth was the last thing I felt when Karen cornered me in my own kitchen. She leaned against the counter like she owned it, her arms crossed, wearing that smile that never reached her eyes. "Eleanor, we need to talk about your situation," she began, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Marcus and I have been discussing it, and we think it's time for you to sign over the deed to this house." I nearly dropped the teacup I was holding. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You're no longer able to manage this place properly," she continued, as if discussing the weather. "You've become a burden on this family, and it's time to face reality." The kitchen felt like it was spinning around me. Little did Karen know, I wasn't about to give up my legacy so easily. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed I'd shared with my husband for 40 years, staring at the ceiling and replaying Karen's words over and over. "Sign over the deed. You've become a burden." The phrases echoed in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. This house wasn't just property to me. It was my life's work, my sanctuary, my legacy. Every room held memories I'd carefully crafted and preserved. The kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals, the living room where my grandchildren had taken their first steps, the garden where I'd found peace during my darkest moments. I'd poured my heart and soul into making this place a home, and now Karen wanted to strip it away from me like I was nothing. But as I watched the sunrise through my bedroom window, something hardened inside me. I wasn't going to let her steal everything from me, not without a fight. I started making plans of my own, plans that would turn the tables on them completely. The next morning, I made the most important phone call of my life. James Wellington had been my husband's lawyer and had handled our family's legal affairs for decades. His voice was warm and familiar when he answered. "Eleanor, what can I do for you today?" I took a deep breath and explained the situation, every manipulative word Karen had spoken, every cruel demand she'd made. James listened quietly, and when I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Eleanor," he finally said, "I think we need to meet in person. And I think we need to discuss some options you might not have considered." I felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Karen had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. While she was busy plotting to steal my home, I was about to secure it in ways she could never imagine. The moment of reckoning was near. Over the next few weeks, I became an actress in my own home. Every time Karen visited with her pointed comments and condescending smiles, I nodded politely and said nothing. When she criticized my housekeeping or questioned my ability to care for myself, I simply smiled and offered her tea. But inside, a storm was brewing. James and I met 3 times that month, always in secret, always when Karen and Marcus thought I was at the doctor or grocery shopping. We went over legal documents, discussed options, and crafted a plan that would protect everything I'd worked for. "She has no legal claim to this house," James assured me. "But we need to make sure she never will." I signed papers, made arrangements, and put pieces in motion that Karen couldn't see coming. Every day, she grew more confident, more demanding. She had no idea what was about to hit her. The day finally arrived when I would show her exactly who she was dealing with. I'll never forget the look of pure arrogance on Karen's face that Tuesday morning. She strutted into my living room like she was walking into her own palace, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors my husband and I had installed ourselves 20 years ago. "Eleanor," she announced, "today's the day. I've arranged for movers to come and help you transition out." She waved her hand dismissively, as if my entire life could be reduced to a simple transition. "You'll be much happier in a nice little apartment where you don't have to worry about maintaining all this." The smugness in her voice made my blood boil, but I kept my expression neutral. I watched her give orders to the movers who had just arrived, pointing to my furniture like she was directing a play. "That old woman is moving out," she told them, jerking her thumb in my direction. But what Karen didn't know was that the movers weren't here for me. They were here for her. The moment of truth arrived faster than Karen expected. I watched from my favorite chair as the movers began walking toward her belongings instead of mine. Her confident smile faltered as one of them picked up her expensive handbag and headed for the door. "Wait, what are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising an octave. "You're supposed to be packing her things, not mine." The head mover, a kind man named Pete whom James had recommended, calmly showed her the official papers. "Ma'am, we have orders to remove your belongings from this property. The homeowner has requested your immediate departure." Karen's face went white, then red, then a shade of purple I'd never seen before. "This is impossible," she shrieked, spinning around to face me. "You can't do this. This house belongs to me now." I remained seated, watching her world crumble with a calmness that surprised even me. The shock on her face was priceless when the truth finally hit her. "What's happening here?" Marcus's voice cut through Karen's screaming as he rushed through the front door. He'd been at work when the movers arrived, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in his childhood home. His eyes darted between his hysterical wife, the movers carrying her belongings outside, and me sitting peacefully in my chair. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his face pale with confusion. Karen grabbed his arm desperately. "She's kicking us out. Your crazy mother is trying to steal our house." But I wasn't crazy, and this wasn't their house. I stood slowly, walked to my desk, and pulled out the folder James had prepared. "Marcus," I said quietly, "this house has never stopped being mine, and now it never will be." I handed him the legal documents that proved my ownership was not only intact but reinforced with protections Karen had never dreamed of. My son stood there, frozen, as the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The silence in the room was deafening after I showed Marcus the papers. I watched my son's face as he read through the legal documents, seeing the exact moment he realized what his wife had tried to do. His hands shook as he flipped through page after page of evidence, Karen's attempts to manipulate the property records, her consultations with lawyers about my mental capacity, her plans to have me declared incompetent. Karen, he whispered, his voice barely audible. What is all this? But Karen was beyond explanations. She was still screaming at the movers, demanding they stop, threatening to call the police. They can't remove my things. I live here. But the legal papers in Marcus's hands told a different story. I had spent months working with James to not only secure my ownership, but to ensure that no one could ever challenge it again. The $5 million investment I'd made in legal protections was paying off in ways Karen could never have imagined. As the movers continued loading Karen's belongings into their truck, she turned her fury on me with a venom I'd never seen before. You think you've won, don't you, you old witch? She snarled, her perfect composure completely shattered. This isn't over. I'll fight this. I'll prove you're not competent to own this house. But her threats fell on deaf ears. James had prepared for every possible challenge she might raise. We had medical evaluations proving my mental and physical health, financial records showing my capability to maintain the property, and, most importantly, documentation of her attempted fraud. Karen, I said calmly, you made one crucial error. You assumed I was weak and helpless. You forgot that I've been managing properties and finances longer than you've been alive. Marcus stood between us, looking lost and broken. He was finally seeing his wife's true nature, but it was too late to undo the damage. The regret in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. The last box of Karen's belongings disappeared into the moving truck as the afternoon sun began to set. She stood on the driveway, my driveway, looking smaller and more desperate than I'd ever seen her. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared from tears of rage and frustration. This isn't legal, she kept repeating, but her voice had lost its earlier venom. It was the sound of someone who was finally understanding that her game was over. Marcus emerged from the house carrying the suitcase she'd packed in a hurry, his face a mask of confusion and disappointment. Where are we supposed to go? He asked quietly. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a pang of sadness for my son. He'd been manipulated just as much as I had, caught between the woman he'd married and the mother who'd raised him. But choices have consequences, and he'd made his. Karen wasn't done fighting yet, but her weapons were getting weaker by the hour. That evening, after Karen and Marcus had driven away to whatever temporary shelter they'd managed to find, I sat alone in my living room and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The house felt different now, not empty, but cleaner somehow, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. I walked through each room, touching familiar objects and remembering happier times when my son was just a boy who loved his mother unconditionally. The kitchen where I'd taught him to make pancakes, the hallway where we'd measured his height each birthday, the back porch where we'd sit together watching storms roll in. All of it was still mine, still safe, still filled with the love I'd poured into every corner. But I knew this victory came with a price. I'd saved my home, but I might have lost my son forever. The thought hurt more than I wanted to admit, but I'd learned that sometimes protecting what matters most requires impossible choices. The phone rang early the next morning. Marcus's voice was strained and tired when I answered. Mom, can we talk? I invited him over, hoping against hope that maybe we could begin to repair the damage Karen had done to our relationship. He arrived alone, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. We sat in the kitchen where I'd once fed him breakfast before school every day for 12 years. I didn't know, he began, his voice breaking. I had no idea what she was planning. She told me you were getting confused, that you needed help, that we were just looking out for you. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him it would all be okay, but the wound was still too fresh. Marcus, I said carefully, she tried to steal my home, and you helped her. He buried his face in his hands. I know. God, Mom, I know. I was so stupid. But stupidity was different from betrayal, and I wasn't sure forgiveness would come easily. Over the next week, I learned just how thorough Karen's deception had been. James showed me documents she'd filed trying to have me declared mentally incompetent, applications she'd made to social services claiming I was being neglected, even consultations with real estate agents about selling my house. She'd been planning this takeover for months, maybe even years, carefully laying groundwork to make her theft appear legitimate. "She's lucky we caught this when we did," James explained. "A few more months, and she might have succeeded in having you committed or declared incapacitated." The thought sent chills down my spine. This wasn't just about wanting my house, this was about erasing me entirely. But Karen had underestimated my resources and my determination. The $5 million I'd invested in legal protections had bought me more than just security, it had bought me justice. Every dollar spent on lawyers, investigators, and legal safeguards was worth it to see the shock on her face when her plan crumbled. Karen made one last desperate attempt to regain control 2 weeks later. She arrived at my door with a different lawyer, a younger man who looked uncomfortable with whatever story she'd told him. "Mrs. Winston," he began formally, "my client believes there may have been some irregularities in the recent property disputes." I invited them in, offered coffee, and calmly listened to their threats and demands. When they finished, I called James, who arrived within an hour carrying a briefcase full of documents. What followed was the most satisfying hour of my life, as James methodically destroyed every argument they'd prepared. Karen's own recorded statements, her fraudulent applications, her attempted manipulation of official records, it was all there, carefully documented and legally devastating. By the time James finished presenting our evidence, Karen's lawyer was already backing toward the door. "Ma'am," he told Karen quietly, "I think you should consider dropping this matter entirely." But Karen's pride wouldn't let her surrender gracefully. The harassment continued for another month. Karen would drive by my house at odd hours, sometimes parking across the street and just staring at the windows. She called my neighbors, trying to convince them I was dangerous or unstable. She even showed up at my doctor's office, demanding to speak with him about my declining mental state. But James had prepared for this too. We had restraining orders ready, documentation of her harassment, and a network of witnesses who could testify to her behavior. Each desperate move she made only strengthened our case and weakened hers. I began to feel sorry for her in a way I hadn't expected. This house had become such an obsession for her that she couldn't accept defeat gracefully. She'd lost not just the property she'd coveted, but her marriage, her reputation, and her self-respect. Meanwhile, I was learning to live in peace again, to tend my garden without looking over my shoulder, to sleep soundly in the home I'd fought so hard to protect. The final confrontation came on a rainy Thursday evening in April. I was reading in my living room when Karen's car pulled into my driveway one last time. She sat there for nearly an hour, before finally getting out and walking to my door. When I opened it, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Gone was the arrogant, perfectly groomed daughter-in-law who'd tried to steal my life. In her place stood someone broken and defeated, her clothes wrinkled, her hair unkempt, her eyes red with tears and exhaustion. "Eleanor," she said quietly, "I know you hate me, but I need to ask you something." I stepped aside and let her in, more out of curiosity than kindness. She sat on the edge of the couch like she might need to run at any moment. "Was it all planned from the beginning?" she asked. "Did you know what I was trying to do?" I considered lying, letting her think I was smarter than I'd actually been. But the truth was simpler and somehow more painful. "No, Karen," I told her honestly. "I had no idea what you were planning until it was almost too late. I trusted you because you were family." She looked genuinely surprised, as if she'd convinced herself I'd been playing some elaborate game all along. "Then how?" she whispered. How did you stop me?" I explained about James, about the legal protections we'd put in place, about the $5 million investment that had secured my home forever. With each detail, I watched her face grow paler. She'd been so focused on her manipulation and schemes that she'd never considered I might have resources she couldn't see or access. $5 million, she repeated numbly. "You spent $5 million just to keep me from getting this house." I nodded, and I'd spend it again. The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with everything we'd lost. Finally, she stood to leave. "I'm sorry," she whispered at the door. But some apologies come too late to matter. Marcus came to see me the day after Karen's final visit. He looked older, wearier, but somehow cleaner too, as if Karen's departure had lifted a weight I hadn't realized he was carrying. She's moving to California, he told me, sitting in the same chair where his father used to read the evening paper. Her sister found her a job out there. She asked me to come with her. I waited, not sure I wanted to hear his answer. I said no, he continued. I told her I needed to stay here and try to fix what I'd broken. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both of us aware that healing would take time. He'd chosen his wife over his mother when it mattered most, and that betrayal couldn't be erased with good intentions. But he was still my son, still the boy I'd raised with love and hope. I'd like to try to earn your forgiveness, he said finally. If you'll let me. I looked at him, seeing both the man who'd hurt me and the child I'd cherished. Time would tell if trust could be rebuilt. 3 months later, I was working in my garden when Marcus arrived with a surprise. He brought his daughter Amy, my granddaughter whom I hadn't seen since before the whole ordeal began. She was 7 now, all gap-toothed smile and boundless energy, and she ran straight into my arms like no time had passed at all. Grandma Eleanor, Daddy said you have the most beautiful roses in the whole world. As she chattered about school and friends and her missing tooth, I felt something inside me begin to heal. This was what I'd been fighting for, not just the house itself, but the love and memories it contained, the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Marcus watched us from a distance, and when Amy ran off to chase butterflies, he approached slowly. She missed you, he said. I missed you too. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. Some wounds take longer to heal than others, but family is worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth second chances when they're earned honestly. As summer turned to fall, I found myself stronger than I'd been in years. The stress of Karen's manipulation and threats was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence in my own power and worth. I'd learned that I was far from helpless, far from the burden she'd tried to make me believe I was. The house felt truly mine again, every room filled with peace instead of tension. I started hosting family dinners again, small gatherings with Marcus and Amy, slowly rebuilding the relationships that had been damaged. My neighbors, who'd witnessed the drama from a distance, began stopping by more often, bringing cookies or just sitting on my porch to chat. I realized that Karen's cruelty had inadvertently shown me how many people truly cared about me. The $5 million I'd spent on legal protection was worth every penny, not just for the security it provided, but for the lesson it taught me about my own strength and value. 1 year later, I received an unexpected letter from California. Karen's handwriting was different, smaller, more careful, less bold than the woman who'd once demanded my home. She wrote about her new job, her tiny apartment, her ongoing therapy sessions. I understand now that what I did was wrong, she wrote. I was so jealous of what you had, so resentful of having to be grateful to you for everything, that I convinced myself you didn't deserve it. I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what I lost, not just the house, but the chance to be part of a real family. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and put it in my desk drawer. Forgiveness might come someday, but it would be on my terms in my time. For now, it was enough to know that she finally understood the magnitude of what she'd tried to steal. The house around me hummed with contentment, every room a testament to the truth that love and determination will always triumph over greed and manipulation. Today, as I write this story in the same living room where it all began, I'm surrounded by everything I fought to protect. The afternoon sun streams through windows that have watched 3 generations of my family grow and change. Amy is 13 now, and she helps me tend the garden Karen once said I was too old to manage. Marcus has become the son I always hoped he'd be, having learned the hard way that family loyalty can't be taken for granted. The house is exactly as it should be, filled with love, laughter, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from standing your ground when everything you value is at stake. People sometimes ask if I regret spending so much money to keep one house. They don't understand that it was never about the property itself. It was about refusing to let someone else decide my worth, my capability, my right to live in dignity in the home I'd built with my own hands and heart. Karen learned too late that I wasn't a weak old woman to be discarded. I was a force to be reckoned with, and this was just the beginning of a new chapter where I would never be underestimated again.